The fluorescent lights of Henderson Corp hummed their usual tune at 11 p.m., casting long shadows across the marble floors of the 42nd floor. Daniel Brooks pushed his cleaning cart down the executive corridor, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished surface. His hands were calloused from years of gripping mop handles and spray bottles, his shoulders permanently hunched from bending over toilets that cost more than his monthly rent. He was 34 but looked 40, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. In his cart, beneath the industrial-strength cleaning supplies, lay his most precious possession wrapped in faded cloth, a violin his grandfather had given him 20 years ago, the same violin that once promised a different life, a life with stages and applause and a woman who loved him for the music in his soul. But promises break, and sometimes they take everything with them. Daniel paused at the CEO's office, the nameplate reading Victoria Henderson in elegant gold lettering. Through the glass walls he could see the city sprawled below, a million lights representing a million lives he'd never touch. He sprayed the glass and began wiping in smooth, practiced circles. He didn't notice the small figure sitting in the waiting area just outside the office. A boy, no more than 7 years old, sat perfectly still on the leather couch, his hands folded in his lap. He wore expensive clothes, a pressed white shirt and navy pants, but there was something fragile about the way he held himself, as if the world were made of sharp edges he couldn't see, because he couldn't. The boy's eyes, a startling shade of blue, gazed straight ahead at nothing. A white cane rested against his knee. Daniel finished the glass and moved to empty the trash bin when he heard it, a small, shaky breath, the kind that comes before tears. He looked at the boy. "Hey there," Daniel said softly, kneeling down to the child's level. "You okay, buddy?" The boy's eye had turned toward his voice, but not quite at him. "I'm waiting for my mom. She's working late again." "Ah." Daniel nodded, though the gesture was useless. "What's your name?" "Evan." "That's a strong name." "I'm Daniel." He paused, glancing at the closed office door. "Your mom must be pretty important if she works this late." Evan's small shoulders lifted in a shrug that held too much loneliness for someone so young. "She's always working. Sometimes I fall asleep here and wake up in the car." Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that ache, the one that came from being alone even when people were around. "You like music, Evan?" The boy's face transformed, a smile breaking through the sadness. "I love music. It's the only thing I can see." Something shifted in Daniel's heart. A door he'd locked years ago creaked open just an inch. "Want to hear something?" he asked before his brain could stop him. Evan nodded eagerly. Daniel reached into his cart and unwrapped the violin. The wood was worn smooth. The varnish faded in places where his fingers had traveled 1,000 times. He tucked it under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to play. The melody started soft, tentative, like a conversation begun after years of silence. It was Vivaldi's Winter, but not the way concert halls knew it. This was the version that lived in his bones, shaped by heartbreak and survival, by cold apartments and empty refrigerations, by dreams that had died but somehow left echoes behind. Evan's entire body stilled. His breathing slowed. Tears began streaming down his cheeks, but his smile grew wider. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It sounds like flying." Daniel's fingers moved faster, the music building, and for a moment, he wasn't a janitor in a building that barely knew his name. He was himself again, the self he'd buried. What he didn't know was that in her office, Victoria Henderson had paused mid-email, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. She'd been about to buzz her assistant to check on Evan when she heard it. Music. She pulled up the security camera feed on her monitor. Her breath caught. There was her son, her beautiful, isolated son who barely smiled anymore, sitting with tears of joy on his face. And there, kneeling beside him with a battered violin, was the night janitor she'd never bothered to learn the name of. Victoria's hand covered her mouth. The music poured through the speakers and something inside her cracked. How long had it been since she'd seen Evan truly happy? How many therapists and specialists and expensive programs had failed to reach the place this stranger had found in seconds? She leaned closer to the screen, watching the janitor's face. There was such tenderness there, such genuine care. Who was this man? If this moved you, leave a like and stay until the end. Sometimes the smallest moments change everything. Daniel let the final note fade into silence, the bow trembling slightly against the strings. The 42nd floor felt different now, as if the music had rearranged something fundamental in the air. Evan wiped his face with the back of his hand, still smiling. Can you play more, please? Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall. He had 6 more floors to clean before his shift ended at 2 a.m. His supervisor would write him up if he fell behind again. 3 write-ups meant termination, and he was already at 2. I really should get back to work, buddy. The light in Evan's face dimmed. Oh, okay. That small, accepting okay gutted Daniel more than tears would have. It was the sound of a child used to disappointment, used to people leaving, used to being alone. Daniel looked at his cart, at the floors that would still be dirty in the morning whether he cleaned them tonight or not, at the job that paid just enough to keep him in a studio apartment, with walls so thin he could hear his neighbors' arguments like they were in the room with him. Then he looked at Evan. You know what? Daniel sat down on the couch beside the boy. The floors can wait 15 minutes. Evan's face lit up like Christmas morning. Daniel played Pachelbel's Canon, then a gentle rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. His fingers remembered every note, even after 5 years of silence. He'd sold almost everything when his wife left, the furniture, his good clothes, even his wedding ring, but he couldn't sell the violin. It would have been like selling his own heart. Evan swayed softly to the music, his hands conducting imaginary orchestras in his lap. In her office, Victoria couldn't look away from the monitor. She'd opened 3 different documents in the past 20 minutes and hadn't typed a single word in any of them. She was supposed to be reviewing the quarterly reports for the board meeting in the morning, but all she could focus on was the screen. Her son, her brilliant, lonely son. She'd given him everything money could buy, the best schools, private tutors, cutting-edge treatments. She'd rearranged her entire life after her husband died 3 years ago, throwing herself into running the company he'd built because it was the only way she knew how to honor his memory and secure Evan's future. But somewhere in all that securing and providing and surviving, she'd missed something essential. She'd missed him. Victoria watched the janitor lean down to say something to Evan, watched her son laugh, actually laugh, a sound she realized she hadn't heard in months, and felt something inside her break and heal at the same time. She made a decision. Victoria stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked to her office door. She paused with her hand on the handle, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing? She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She didn't just approach the cleaning staff. But then she heard Evan's laugh again through the door, and titles stopped mattering. She opened the door. Daniel saw the movement first and immediately scrambled to his feet, nearly dropping the violin. He knew that silhouette even in shadow. Everyone who worked in the building knew Victoria Henderson's posture, the way she carried authority in every step. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he started, his heart hammering. "I know I should be working. Don't apologize." Victoria stepped into the light, and Daniel saw her face for the first time up close. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 38, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that looked exhausted but kind. "Please, don't stop on my account." Evan's head swiveled toward his mother's voice. "Mom, Daniel plays the violin. He's amazing. Did you hear him?" "I heard," Victoria said softly, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "It was beautiful." Daniel felt heat crawl up his neck. He was suddenly aware of his janitor's uniform, the bleach stains on his pants, the fact that he probably smelled like industrial cleaner and sweat. "Thank you, ma'am. I should really get back to—" "Do you have formal training?" Victoria interrupted, moving closer. She sat down beside Evan, and Daniel noticed how naturally her hand found his, how Evan's whole body relaxed at her touch. Yes, Juilliard. A long time ago." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Juilliard?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He hated that question, hated the judgment that always followed. How does someone go from Juilliard to mopping floors? "Things happened," he said simply. Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Daniel forced himself not to look away. He'd learned that much in 5 years of being invisible. If someone actually saw you, you didn't flinch. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel Brooks, ma'am." "Daniel," she repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "How would you feel about playing for Evan sometimes? I could arrange for you to come during the day, during his music therapy sessions. We'd compensate you, of course." Daniel blinked. I work nights, ma'am. I can't. I own the way. Company, Daniel. I can adjust your schedule. What would you have said in his place?" Daniel's throat went dry. 1,000 thoughts crashed through his mind at once, each one pulling him in different directions. This was Victoria Henderson offering him something. He wasn't sure what exactly, but anything connected to her meant risk, meant visibility, meant people asking questions about why a Juilliard graduate was cleaning toilets at night. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but he trailed off, looking at Evan's hopeful face. "I don't think I'm the right person for that kind of thing." "Why not?" Victoria's voice wasn't demanding, just curious, genuine. "Because I failed. Because I had my chance and I destroyed it. Because people like me don't get second acts." "I'm just not," Daniel said finally. Evan's hand tightened around his mother's. "Please, Daniel. Music is the only time I can forget that I'm different. When you play, I can see colors. I can see everything." Something shattered in Daniel's chest. He'd spent 5 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that music was in his past, that he was better off numb. But this child, this beautiful, brave child, was asking him to remember who he used to be. "I'll think about it," he heard himself say. Victoria nodded slowly, a small smile touching her lips. "That's all I ask." She pulled a business card from her jacket pocket and held it out. "My direct line. Call me when you've decided." Daniel took the card, his fingers brushing hers for just a second. It was the most expensive piece of paper he'd ever held. "Come on, sweetheart," Victoria said to Evan, helping him stand. "It's past midnight. Time to go home. But Mom, we'll talk to Daniel again. I promise." Evan turned toward Daniel's voice. "Will you really think about it, really, truly?" "Really, truly," Daniel said, and meant it despite every instinct screaming at him to run. He watched them walk to the elevator, Victoria's hand gentle on Evan's shoulder, guiding him. Just before the doors closed, Evan waved in his general direction. Daniel lifted his hand in return, even though the boy couldn't see it. Then they were gone, and he was alone with his cart and his violin and a business card that felt like a grenade with the pin already pulled. He finished his shift in a daze, his mind replaying the conversation, the music, the look in Victoria's eyes when she'd heard him play. By the time he got back to his studio, apartment at 3 a.m., his whole body ached with exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor. Daniel sat on his threadbare couch, the only furniture in the room besides a mattress on the floor and a small TV he'd bought at a pawn shop, and stared at Victoria's business card. His phone buzzed, a text from his supervisor. "Floors on 42 weren't finished. Third strike. Come to my office before your next shift." Daniel's stomach dropped. That was it. He was fired. 5 years of invisible work, of showing up every night, of never complaining or asking for anything, gone because he'd spent 15 minutes playing music for a lonely child. He should have felt devastated. Instead, he felt something else. Something dangerous. Relief. He looked at the violin case leaning against the wall, then at the business card in his hand. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Music isn't something you do, Danny. It's something you are. And you can't kill who you are no matter how hard you try." Daniel picked up his phone. His hands shook as he typed the number from the card. The text was simple. "This is Daniel Brooks. I'd like to talk about your offer." He hit send before fear could stop him. The reply came faster than he expected. "My office tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come to the main entrance, not the service door. And Daniel, bring your violin." He read the message 3 times, his heart hammering. What was he doing? This woman didn't know him, didn't know the mistakes he'd made, the people he'd hurt, the ways he'd failed everyone who'd ever believed in him. She was looking at him like he was someone worth saving, but she didn't have all the facts. Daniel thought about his ex-wife, about the final fight that had ended with her screaming, "You care more about that violin than you ever cared about me." He thought about the audition he'd missed because he'd been too drunk to stand, the one that would have changed everything. He thought about all the ways he'd proven he wasn't worth anyone's faith. But then he thought about Evan's face when the music played, the way the boy had smiled like someone had turned on lights in a dark room. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about him at all. Daniel set his phone down and opened the violin case. The instrument gleamed in the dim light from the street outside his window. He lifted it, tucked it under his chin, and began to play. This time he played for himself, for the man he used to be, and the man he might still become. For every night he'd spent convinced he was nothing more than the worst versions of his mistakes. The music filled his tiny apartment, leaking through the thin walls. He heard someone knock on the ceiling from upstairs. It was 3:30 in the morning, but he didn't stop. For the first time in 5 years, Daniel Brooks was playing like he had a reason. And for the first time in 5 years, he thought maybe he did. Daniel stood outside Henderson Corp's main entrance at 1:55 p.m., feeling like an imposter. He'd worn his only dress shirt, wrinkled but clean, and the pants he saved for job interviews that never went anywhere. The violin case in his hand felt heavier than it should, like it was full of all the years he'd wasted. The glass doors were different from this angle. As a night janitor, he'd only ever entered through the service entrance in the back, a gray metal door next to the dumpsters. From here, the building looked like it belonged in a magazine, all modern architecture and money. "You can do this," he muttered to himself. "You're just talking to her, that's all." He pulled the door open and stepped into the lobby. The security guard at the desk looked up, his eyes immediately suspicious. Daniel recognized him, Marcus, who'd given him the silent nod every night for 3 years but had never actually spoken to him. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked in that tone security guards use when they already assume the answer is no. "I have an appointment with Ms. Henderson. 2:00. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw the flicker of disbelief. "Name? Daniel Brooks." Marcus typed something into his computer and his eyebrows rose slightly. "ID, please." Daniel handed over his driver's license, trying not to think about how the photo was from 7 years ago, when he still had hope in his eyes. Marcus made a phone call, speaking quietly. Then he handed Daniel a visitor's badge. 42nd floor. Elevators to your right. Her assistant will meet. "You?" "Thanks." The elevator ride felt eternal. Daniel watched the numbers climb, his reflection staring back at him from the polished metal doors. He looked tired, old, like someone who'd forgotten how to believe in anything. The doors opened. A young woman in a sharp blazer stood waiting. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Jennifer, Ms. Henderson's assistant. Right this way, please." She led him through the executive floor, the same corridor he'd mopped last night, but it looked completely different in daylight. Everything sparkled. People in expensive suits moved past with purpose, their shoes clicking on marble that Daniel knew intimately from 3 years of scrubbing. None of them looked at him. He realized he preferred being invisible. Jennifer stopped at Victoria's office door and knocked twice. "Ms. Henderson, Mr. Brooks is here. Send him in." The office was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that made Daniel's breath catch. The entire city spread out like a promise. Victoria stood behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear, but she smiled and gestured for him to sit. Daniel perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his car, setting the violin case carefully at his feet. "I understand, Margaret, but the answer is still no," Victoria said into the phone, her voice firm but not unkind. "We're not cutting the disability benefits package. Find the money somewhere else." She paused. "Because those people matter more than our profit margin. That's why." Another pause. "Then we'll discuss it at the board meeting, thank you." She hung up and turned her full attention to Daniel. "I'm sorry about that. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, ma'am." "Victoria, please." "Ma'am makes me feel ancient." She sat down across from him, not behind her desk, and Daniel appreciated that small gesture more than she could know. "So, you brought your violin. You asked me to." "I did." She leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you. After you left last night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I looked into your background. Daniel's stomach clenched. Here it comes. I know about Juilliard. I know about the scholarship you won at 18, the performances, the reviews that called you a prodigy. She paused. I also know you dropped out in your final year, and I know you've been working as a night janitor for various companies in the city for the past 5 years. He waited for the judgment. The inevitable question, what happened to you? Instead, Victoria said, I don't care about the gap in your resume. I don't care why you stopped playing professionally. What I care about is what I saw last night. Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes. And what did you see? Someone who made my son feel something real. Something all my money and connections and desperate efforts have failed to give him. Her voice cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like watching your child suffer and being powerless to help? No, ma'am. Victoria, I don't have kids. Then let me tell you, it's agony. Evan lost his sight in the accident that killed his father 3 years ago. One drunk driver, one moment of shattered glass, and everything changed. She stood and walked to the window, her back to Daniel. I've tried everything. The best doctors, experimental treatments, therapy, support groups. He's learned to navigate the world, but he hasn't learned how to be happy in it. Until last night. Until she saw something that money couldn't buy. Connection. Daniel's chest tightened. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. She turned back to him. Here's what I'm proposing. I want to hire you as Evan's private music teacher. Not therapy, just music. Whatever you feel like playing, whatever you want to teach him. An hour a day, 5 days a week. I'll pay you $75,000 a year plus benefits. Daniel's mind went blank. $75,000. He currently made $28,000. That's too much, he stammered. No, it's not. It's what you're worth. It's what bringing light back into my son's life is worth. But I'm not a teacher. You taught him last night that the world still contains beauty. That's more valuable than anything else. Victoria returned to her chair. I'm not asking you to fix him, Daniel. I'm asking you to share something beautiful with him. That's all. Daniel looked at the violin case. His hands were shaking. This was the thing about second chances. They were terrifying. They meant you could fail again. They meant you could disappoint someone who believed in you. But they also meant you could become someone different than who you were yesterday. I have to tell you something, Daniel heard himself say. You did your research, but you don't know everything. Victoria waited. I was married. Had a wife who believed in me, who worked 2 jobs to support us while I chased my dream. And I destroyed it. I became obsessed with being perfect, with proving I deserved the scholarship, with being worth her sacrifice. I started drinking to deal with the pressure, missed rehearsals, missed our anniversary, missed everything that mattered. His voice broke. She left me the day before my senior recital, the one that would have launched my career. I got drunk instead of performing, lost everything. He looked up at Victoria, expecting disgust. Instead, he saw understanding. And you think that disqualifies you from this? Doesn't it? Daniel, I'm not hiring your past. I'm hiring who you are now, the man who stopped cleaning floors to play music for a lonely child, knowing it might cost him his job. She smiled sadly. We've all got scars. The question is what we do with them. Daniel sat in silence, Victoria's words settling over him like snow. The office felt too bright, too clean, too full of possibility for someone like him. I don't want to let him down, he said finally, his voice barely above. A whisper. Your son. He's already been through so much. If I take this and I fail again, then you fail, and we'll figure it out. Victoria's gaze was steady, unwavering. But what if you don't? What if this is exactly what both of you need? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to name yet. Daniel thought about his apartment, about the nights he'd come home and stared at the violin case like it was a coffin holding everything he used to be. He thought about the weight of pretending to be nobody, the safety of invisibility. And then he thought about Evan's smile. Okay, he said, I'll do it. Victoria's face transformed. She stood extending her hand. Thank you, Daniel. You have no idea what this means. He shook her hand, her grip firm and warm. When do I start? How about now? Evan's in the conference room down the hall with his tutor. They're finishing up math, but I think they can spare some time for music. Daniel's heart kicked against his ribs. Right now? Unless you have somewhere else to be. He didn't. He'd cleared his whole day for this meeting, half expecting it to end in polite rejection. Now he was going to see Evan again, going to play music, going to step back into a version of himself he'd thought was dead. Lead the way, he said. They walked down the corridor together, and Daniel was acutely aware that people were staring now. Not at him exactly, but at the sight of Victoria Henderson walking, beside a man in a wrinkled shirt carrying a violin case. Whispers followed in their wake. Don't mind them, Victoria said quietly. They're always looking for gossip. Give them something real to talk about. She stopped at a conference room door and knocked softly before opening it. Evan sat at the large table, his fingers moving across a Braille textbook while a middle-aged woman spoke softly about fractions. When the door opened, his head lifted immediately. Mom, I brought you a surprise. Sweetheart. Daniel? Evan's whole face lit up. Is that Daniel? It is, Daniel said, stepping into the room. Hey, buddy. Evan practically leaped from his chair, his hands outstretched until Daniel moved close enough for the boy to grab his arm. You came back. You're really here. I'm here. Daniel looked at Victoria over Evan's head, saw the moisture in her eyes, and understood suddenly that this was about more than music. This was about a mother watching her son come alive again. Mrs. Patterson, Victoria said to the tutor, let's call it a day. Can you come back tomorrow? Of course, Ms. Henderson. The tutor gathered her materials quickly, shooting curious glances at Daniel as she left. When the door closed, Evan tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Will you play for me? Please? I've been thinking about it all day. I couldn't even focus on math. Daniel laughed softly. It felt strange in his chest, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. That's why I'm here, but not just to play. For you. Your mom and I talked, and I'm going to be your music teacher now, if you want me to be. Evan's mouth dropped open. Really? You mean like every day? 5 days a week, Daniel confirmed. The boy threw his arms around Daniel's waist, hugging him so tightly it hurt. Daniel froze for a moment, uncertain, then slowly wrapped one arm around Evan's shoulders. How long had it been since someone had hugged him? How long since he'd let anyone close enough to try? Thank you, Evan whispered. Into Daniel's shirt. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Victoria turned away, but not before Daniel saw her wipe her eyes. Okay, buddy, Daniel said gently, pulling back. Let's make some music. He settled into a chair and opened the violin case. The instrument gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Evan stood close, his fingers hovering near the table as if anchoring himself. What do you want to hear? Daniel asked. Something happy. Something that sounds like flying. Daniel thought for a moment, then began to play Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. The notes danced through the conference room, bright and playful, filling the space with joy. Evan began to move, swaying and spinning in small circles, his arms outstretched like wings. His face was radiant, completely unguarded. This was a child who'd learned to be careful in the world, to move slowly and check for obstacles. But in this moment, he was free. Victoria leaned against the wall, watching her son fly. Daniel played through the entire first movement, then transitioned seamlessly into something improvised. A melody that felt like sunshine and laughter and all the things he'd forgotten existed. His fingers moved across the strings like they were speaking a language he'd thought he'd lost. This was why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the stages or the applause or the dreams of greatness. For this. For the pure, simple magic of making someone feel something. Beautiful. When he finally lowered the bow, Evan was breathless and grinning. Again, he demanded. Play it again. Tomorrow, Daniel promised. We've got time now. Lots of time. Evan's smile somehow got bigger. Tomorrow, he echoed, like it was a promise he could hold on to. Victoria straightened from the wall. Evan, honey, why don't you go with Jennifer to get a snack? Daniel and I need to talk about his schedule. Can I have cookies? 2, not 4. 3? Don't push it, kiddo. Evan laughed and made his way to the door, his cane tapping lightly. At the threshold, he turned back toward Daniel's general direction. "You're really staying, right? This isn't a dream?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm really staying." After Evan left, Victoria sank into a chair like all the strength had left her body. "I haven't seen him that happy since before the accident," she said. "Not once. He's a great kid. He is." She looked at Daniel with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You've given me my son back. In one day you've done what 3 years and $1 million couldn't do. I just played music." "No, you gave him permission to be joyful again." Victoria stood and moved to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "After the accident, after we lost Michael, I threw myself into work. I told myself I was securing our future, making sure Evan would be taken care of. But really I was hiding. And Evan stopped being a child. He became so quiet, so careful. Like he thought if he took up too much space, he might lose me too." Daniel carefully placed the violin back in its case. "It's not too late," he said quietly. "He's still a kid. He can still have a childhood." "Can he?" Victoria turned back to him, and Daniel saw the vulnerability beneath her CEO exterior. "Can we fix what's broken?" "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's not about fixing anything. Maybe it's just about being present for what's here now. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. For all of us." 3 months passed like a melody Daniel hadn't known he was waiting to hear. Every weekday at 2 p.m., he arrived at Henderson Corp through the main entrance. Marcus, the security guard, now greeted him by name. Jennifer always had coffee waiting. 2 sugars, no cream, just the way he liked it. And Evan waited in the conference room, practically vibrating with excitement. They started with basics. How to hold a bow. How to feel the strings. How to listen for the music between the notes. Evan couldn't see the violin, but his fingers learned its shape like reading Braille. His small hands struggled with the positions at first, but he never complained, never gave up. "Music is about feeling," Daniel told him one afternoon as Evan fumbled through a simple scale. "You don't need to see it. You need to trust it." "Like trusting someone to catch you when you fall?" Evan asked. "Exactly like that." The boy's face grew. "Serious. I'm scared of falling." Daniel set down his own violin and knelt beside Evan's chair. "I know, but you know what I learned? Sometimes falling is the only way to find out you can fly." Evan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you fall?" "I crashed," Daniel admitted. "Hard. Thought I'd never get up again." "But you did." "I'm trying to." Evan reached out until his hand found Daniel's shoulder. "I'm glad you're trying with me." Something in Daniel's chest cracked open a little more. They didn't just practice music. They talked. About Evan's school, his friends who didn't know how to act around him anymore, his memories of his father, about Daniel's grandfather who'd taught him violin, the concert halls he'd played in, the dreams he'd carried and lost. "Do you miss being famous?" Evan asked one day. "I was never famous, just promising." "What's the difference?" Daniel thought about that. "Famous means everyone knows your name. Promising means everyone's waiting for you to fail." "That sounds lonely." It was. Evan tilted his head, considering. "Are you lonely now?" Daniel looked at this boy who'd somehow become the most important part of his day and realized the answer had changed. Not right now. Victoria watched these sessions sometimes, standing in the doorway where she thought Daniel couldn't see her. But he always knew she was there, could feel her presence like a change in the air pressure. She never interrupted, never offered feedback, just watched her son laugh and struggle and grow. One evening, as Daniel was packing up his violin, she finally spoke. "Stay for dinner?" He looked up, surprised. "What?" "Evan and I usually order takeout and eat in my office. Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join us." Daniel knew he should say no. This was a job, not a friendship. There were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But Evan appeared in the doorway, his face hopeful, and Daniel's carefully constructed walls crumbled a little more. "I'd like that," he heard himself say. They ate Chinese food around Victoria's desk. Her in her executive chair, Daniel and Evan on the couch, cartons spread out like a picnic. Evan told jokes he'd learned at school. Victoria shared stories about her staff meetings that went wrong. and Daniel found himself laughing more in 1 hour than he had in 5 years. "Your turn," Evan said to Daniel, waving an egg roll. "Tell us something funny," Daniel thought. "When I was at Juilliard, I had this roommate who was convinced the practice rooms were haunted. He'd leave offerings of energy drinks and granola bars to appease the spirit of musicians past. One night I snuck in and left a note that said, 'More Red Bull, less granola.' He switched majors the next week." Evan burst into giggles. Victoria's laugh was softer but genuine, her whole face transforming in a way that made Daniel's breath catch. "Did you ever tell him it was you?" she asked. "Nope. Still thinks Juilliard is haunted." "That's terrible," Victoria said, but she was smiling. "That's hilarious," Evan corrected. They talked until the food was gone and the city lights had fully taken over the sky. Evan eventually fell asleep on the couch, his head resting against Daniel's arm. Victoria looked at her son, then at Daniel. "He trusts you completely. Do you know how rare that is for him? He's easy to care about." "So are you," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meanings neither of them was ready to. "Name?" Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous and warm and terrifying. "I should go," he said, carefully moving so Evan's head rested on a cushion instead. "Let you get him home." Victoria walked him to the elevator. In the empty corridor, she said, "Daniel, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, his heart suddenly hammering. "These past 3 months, you've changed everything. Not just for Evan, for me too." She took a breath. "I haven't felt present in my own life since Michael died. I've been going through motions, checking boxes, surviving. But watching you with Evan, listening to your music, I'm remembering what it feels like to actually live." Daniel didn't know what to say. This woman, brilliant, powerful, completely out of his league, was looking at him like he mattered, like he was more than his mistakes. "I don't want to complicate things," he said carefully. "Evan needs stability. He needs you. And so do I, apparently." Victoria smiled sadly. "I'm not asking for anything, Daniel. I just needed you to know that you've done more than teach my son music. You've reminded both of us what hope feels like." The elevator dinged, doors opening. Daniel stepped inside, then turned back. "Victoria?" "Yes. You've given me something too. You've given me a reason to believe I'm not beyond saving." The doors began to close, but not before he saw tears in her eyes. 6 months into teaching Evan, Daniel received a call that changed everything. It was Saturday morning, his day off, and he was at the grocery store debating between generic and name-brand cereal when his phone rang. Victoria's number. "Hello, Daniel." Her voice was strained. "I need your help. Evan's school is having a spring talent show next Friday. He signed up to perform. Without telling me." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. "He wants to play violin. In front of 300 people. He's been practicing in secret. Says he has a special piece ready." She paused. "He wants you there. But Daniel, if he fails, if those kids laugh at him, they won't. You can't know that." "No," Daniel agreed. "But I know Evan, and I know that boy is braver than both of us combined." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "He asked me to invite you as his teacher. Will you come?" "Of course I will." The week leading up to the talent show, Evan was focused in a way Daniel had never seen. Whatever piece he'd been practicing, he wouldn't share it. Just smiled mysteriously and said, "You'll hear it Friday." Daniel tried not to be nervous. He failed spectacularly. Friday night, he sat in the school auditorium in the 3rd row, wearing the one suit he owned, the same one he'd worn to his Juilliard audition a lifetime ago. Victoria sat beside him, her leg bouncing with anxious energy. "He's going to be amazing," Daniel whispered. "You can't know that." "I know him." Victoria's hand found his on the armrest between them. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. The talent show was exactly what you'd expect. Off-key singing, enthusiastic but chaotic dance routines, a magic act where the rabbit refused to appear. Parents clapped supportively. Kids fidgeted in their seats. Then the principal called Evan's name. Daniel felt Victoria's hand tighten around his. Evan walked onto the stage alone, his cane tapping softly, his small violin tucked under his arm. He looked impossibly tiny under the stage lights, The auditorium fell silent. Someone in the back whispered, "Can he even see what he's doing?" Daniel's jaw clenched, but Evan seemed unbothered. He moved to the center of the stage with careful confidence, positioned his violin, and spoke into the microphone. "Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Henderson. I'm 7 years old and I can't see, but I can hear music better than anything else in the world." His voice was clear, steady. "My teacher, Daniel, taught me that music isn't about what you see, it's about what you feel. This song is for him, and for my mom, and for everyone who thinks they can't do something because they're different." Daniel stopped breathing. Evan lifted the bow, took a breath, and began to play. It was Vivaldi's Spring, the same piece Daniel had played the first night they met, but transformed. Evan had made it his own, adding flourishes and variations that spoke of hope and growth and a child learning to fly. His technique wasn't perfect. His fingers occasionally slipped, his bow control wavered, in places, but none of that mattered, because what poured out of that violin was pure joy. The audience sat transfixed. Daniel watched teachers wipe their eyes, watched children lean forward in their seats, watched parents grip each other's hands. This wasn't just a performance, it was a declaration. "I am here, I am alive. I am more than what you see." Victoria was crying silently beside him, tears streaming down her face. When Evan played the final note, the auditorium exploded. Everyone was on their feet. Standing ovation, cheers, applause that seemed to shake the walls. Evan stood there, his face glowing with surprise and pride, turning toward the sound like a flower toward the sun. "I did it," Daniel heard him whisper into the microphone. "I actually did it." Daniel didn't remember standing, didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was on the stage, pulling Evan into his arms. The boy dropped his violin into its case and wrapped himself around Daniel like he might float away. "Otherwise, you were perfect," Daniel said into his hair. "You were absolutely perfect." "I was scared." "I know. You did it anyway. That's what brave means." Victoria appeared beside them, and Evan reached for her too, so the three of them stood there in the middle of the stage, holding each other while the auditorium continued to cheer. Later, after the show, after the other parents had congratulated Evan and the principal had asked if he'd perform at the year-end ceremony, they stood in the parking lot under a sky full of stars. "Ice cream," Victoria suggested. "To celebrate?" Evan nodded enthusiastically. "Can Daniel come?" "I think Daniel has to come," Victoria said, looking at Daniel in a way that made his heart stutter. "He's part of this family now." Family. The word settled over Daniel like a blessing he'd stopped believing in. They went to a diner and ordered sundaes too big for anyone to finish. Evan talked non-stop about the performance, about how his fingers felt hot, but in a good way, about how he wanted to learn 10 more songs, about how maybe he could play at the hospital where his dad used to work. Daniel watched this brilliant, brave boy plan his future and felt something inside him heal. On the drive back to drop Daniel at his car, with Evan asleep in the back seat, Victoria said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've given us." "You already have," Daniel said. "You gave me a reason to play again. You gave me a reason to be myself again." Victoria pulled into the parking lot but didn't turn off the car. "Daniel, I know this is complicated. I'm your employer, you're Evan's teacher. There are boundaries that exist for good reasons. But I need to be honest with you." His heart was pounding. "Okay. I'm falling in love with you," she said simply. "Have been for months, and I don't know what to do about it." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The power dynamics, the risk to his job, the possibility of hurting Evan if things went wrong. He thought about his track record with relationships, with commitment, with not destroying good things. Then he thought about Victoria's laugh, about Evan's trust, about the way the three of them fit together like a chord that had always existed, just waiting to be played. "I think," he said slowly, opening his eyes to meet hers, "that maybe the bravest thing we can do is stop being afraid of falling." Victoria's breath caught. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She leaned across the console and kissed him, soft and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Daniel looked at the back seat where Evan slept peacefully, then back at Victoria. Now we figure it out together, all three of us. I like that plan. Me too. They sat there in the parking lot, holding hands across the console, while the city lights sparkled around them like a symphony waiting to be written. Daniel had spent 5 years believing his story was over, that he'd used up his chance at happiness. But maybe life didn't work that way. Maybe there were always new melodies to discover, new harmonies to create, new reasons to believe that broken things could still make beautiful music. He thought about his grandfather's words, "You can't kill who you are." He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. But here, with Victoria's hand in his and Evan's peaceful breathing in the background, and the possibility of tomorrow stretching out like an open road, Daniel understood something fundamental. He wasn't broken. He was just waiting for the right moment to play again. And that moment was now. If this story touched your soul, subscribe and share it. Because we all deserve a second chance to create something beautiful.